Well, welcome to Signs of Life, the show where we find hope in the headlines. My name is Chase Tremere. I'm one of your hosts, and I am joined by Serena Tremere and Montana Christopherson.
Yes.
And today's a little different.
Today is a different day. I mean, I'm in the,
You're
the big
in
girl
chair
seat.
for
The big girl seat. And I have to sit close to Montana. Not my
And
favorite.
we're sitting. We're not standing today.
Just kidding. We are sitting.
We
are
got
sitting.
our coffee cups all ready to roll.
We're ready to roll.
Because today is a little bit different in the sense that we're talking. We're just going to have a conversation today. We're going to talk about some hard stuff and some feelings stuff and just get kind of personal.
My least favorite thing. You took over so naturally there. That was great.
Did I?
You did. It was good.
Oh, go ahead.
No, it was great. No, but we just, like you said, we're gonna have a real conversation today. There's a lot going on in our world, and we obviously we're looking for hope in the headlines, and so we like to look at things that are relevant. We like to hear stories that you guys are sharing, things that everyone's seeing, and of course, there's a lot of stories around what's happening right now in Ukraine and the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and we went back and forth, if I can just be honest with you and invite you into our pre-show meeting. We went back and forth of, these really inspiring stories that are being shared, encouraging stories, sad stories, yes, but really everyone seeming to try to find hope in the headlines, like to find some hope in the middle of this chaotic mess that is happening. And as we began to talk, you shared that you really weren't there.
No, I was not there.
You were not there to try to, and not saying this in a bad way, but like to try to make something sunny out of something that's not. To try to make something really great that's not really great.
Right.
And I think as we began to talk, we realized, especially for me, this is something I do all the time. And that can be really good sometimes, but
What do you mean by that? What do you do all the time?
great question. No matter what the situation is, a negative situation, a hard, difficult situation, I will always want to rush past it and just say, but I'm gonna be good on the other side.
Sure.
And to even a bad
Kind of like that silver lining.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think I rush too fast.
Gotcha.
And I think even at times, if I can even confess, as a believer, as a follower of Jesus, I'll almost use his words and the words of the Bible to make that holy. No, all things are going to work for the good of those who love God. I love God, so it's all going to be good.
Sure.
And that is true,
Right.
but we don't get to just skip to the finish line.
Yeah.
There's a process. There's, I think about the life of Jesus, and there was a death, there was sorrow, there was a crucifixion before there was a
weeping.
resurrection. There was weeping, and
Yeah.
yes, the shortest verse in the Bible quiz here, Jesus wept.
Yeah.
That's super important to stop and weep before you get there. And that's been a challenge for me, and you've called that out of me, and you called that out of me even in our meeting talking about today's episode.
Yeah.
And so, we're going to have a conversation, but you're going to kind of help us through this because one, yes, you do this, but you enjoy doing this, and it's good for us because I'm ready to just talk about the good stuff. And that won't be good.
And I mean, and as a therapist, there's the balance of, you said you do this, and that's true. But first and foremost, I'm a human, and so, and as a highly sensitive person, this conversation is me in the duality of guiding y'all through your feelings and also unpacking my own. And so I think that's a pretty unique perspective that we're going to get in this episode, just because there's no real direction in the conversation. It's just, hey, let's unpack what it is that we're feeling. Not because we didn't care to have a presentation. I think everyone is kind of immersing themselves to some degree with the information and the videos and the stories. But more so, in that pre-production meeting we had yesterday, I just felt the weight, and I still feel the weight of despair. Yeah. And coming on, this is happening just on the heels of a global pandemic. And this is happening on, the world shut down and we were isolated for nearly a year. And, those were moments of high anxiety for many people. And then in the midst of that, we had our own racial tensions in America, and there was so much going on around the world that we can feel like our emotional reserves, at least speaking personally, are like, I don't have a lot to give to another global traumatic event.
Yeah, and I think on top of that too is that's just outside of us. Like
Yeah.
that's not the personal
And that's not personal.
and the family things
What
that
we're
you may
going
be
through
walking
in our
through,
world,
and
right.
You mix that in, and that's different for everybody, but it's
Sure.
still stuff. It's still difficulties. Sure, there's probably some good things in there too, but you mix all that together, and yeah, it's easy to do a few things. I think it's easy to numb out. You know, that can be something that seemingly not bad. You know, I'm just going to work out 3 times a day now, or it can be, oh, I'm going to aid myself with a substance, with alcohol, with something that's not really going to be helpful. We can do the other thing, which is like, well, I'm just going to find out everything I know and be super informed and probably over informed and get in the middle of everything, and like you burn out on that side of things too. And so there's this radical third option of landing somewhere in between that, of I think not being over informed but not being under informed or misinformed either, like having an understanding, but not necessarily having to be the expert on it either. And at the same time, practically, we'll talk about as well, like how to find rest in the middle of all that.
Yeah, how to cope.
How to keep ourselves
What to do.
healthy. Following our episode last week, if you didn't watch, like, encourage you. It was one of my favorite ones this far, talking about boundaries, like how to find and put up boundaries in the middle of these things too. Like it's not necessarily relationship to relationship, but it's our relationship with the issues going on in our world. And
So let me ask you guys, where are you personally when it comes to this, the weight of this? Because what we may be feeling, whatever it may be, it pales in comparison to people actually there, right? But I want to hold space for that. And that is still valid, and we are all still worth taking care of. And so even as onlookers, right? And so Montana, I'm gonna ask you, like, how are you doing? How are you feeling about all this?
I mean, it's definitely really heavy to look at, obviously, and all the pictures and all of the things that you see on the news and social media. And there's a lot of me that's like, I want to be active, right? And like helping in whatever way I can, but I know my limits of what I can do, which is like, sometimes feels like literally nothing.
Yeah.
And I struggle with like even wanting to share something on social media because it feels really shallow to me. Not that the people that are sharing it are shallow,
Sure.
but for me, I'm like, okay, I can share this Instagram post and that's cool, but it makes it feel like I'm not doing enough. But at the same time, I don't know what to do. And I can't fly to Ukraine and I can't help, and I can watch videos and like in theory we could donate money and do things like that, but for me I'm just like I feel helpless.
Helpless. I think a lot of people feel that. In my own way, I also feel helpless, because we can get buried in information, kind of like what you were talking about. We can bury ourselves and keep scrolling and scrolling. And one thing that I recognize in myself, and even in a lot of the people that I talk to, is this desensitization of we're just scrolling. We're actually watching war before our eyes and get desensitized to the fact that it's war.
Right.
That these are real lives, real children, real women, real men making a sacrifice. And in that, we can, like you mentioned, go a whole nother way, but also bury ourselves in this powerlessness of what's a person like me to do? Because here in our streets, they're safe.
Yeah.
We don't, our skies aren't lit up, and we don't hear the things that they're hearing. And so that powerlessness of what is my small life, how insignificant am I in the grand scheme of this? And I think that's a very valid emotion to be experiencing right now that I think many people are also experiencing. What about you?
would this be like because I think the helpless, but maybe even some grief too. Of
Absolutely.
is that a form? Is survivor's guilt? Like I've heard that term before. You know, once again, Montana's not in the middle of Ukraine and got out,
Right.
but would that be a form of survivor's guilt? Of, well, you know, I feel guilty because I feel helpless and because I can't help, but I also it's not happening to me. And so, is it insensitive if I do make a post as I go and drink my Starbucks and
Exactly,
listen to my favorite music driving down my safe street? Like, is that a form of survivor's guilt in a way, or is that a little bit different?
Well, I think in a way, sure, you know, that we look at our experience and we say, like, what's so much better about me
Right.
that I'm not enduring that, right? And, you know, in any tragedy where people have lost their life and we didn't, we ask that question and we feel guilt, like, why them?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and why do I get to live here and why am I safe? And I think that's a valid question to ask, you know, and so balancing that guilt of like, you know, how I am, what I am doing in my environment right now can also exist with my grief and my despair and we can hold, those can live in duality. They can exist in the same situation, right? Like I'm grateful for my safety and my privilege here in America.
That's good.
And I am weeping and broken and burdened for the people across the world, you know, and that can exist. We don't have to pick and choose, right? Because when we feel like we have to pick and choose, we cut ourselves off from a very real emotional experience that is begging to be heard and affirmed, which is at the core of that, it's pain. And pain demands to be felt. And if we suppress it, it's not going to go away. It's going to get bigger and stay longer and try and come out in other ways, you know? And so, to your question, that's a valid question, and I hope I helped answer that.
Because I think grief is probably, I hear Montana talk, and just her sharing is helpful. You know, I think when you hear other people verbalize ultimately similar feelings, it helps, because I would say that I felt angry.
Yeah.
You know, like, and maybe with my personality, just my experience of life has led me to, well, I'm angry, so I'm gonna want to do something, you know, with that anger. I want to defend and I want to fight back, and you know, and still feeling helpless. Like I'm not gonna fly to Ukraine and fight back, literally.
Right.
But that was where I was, and you know, one night I was up till 3 a.m. doing that, scrolling, finding more stories and seeing more things, and then, you know, and then some of it was helpful because I researched, you know, the history of
Right.
the tension between, you know, in this situation between these two countries and what's happened. But then, just like you said, like this is the war in our hand. Like we're seeing it. We're seeing, you know, active
TikTok,
duty soldiers on TikTok, like
Yes.
in the middle of this, and they may die tomorrow.
Today.
Like they may die today. They may die right after they close that phone. Like that's insane. But in the middle of that, like that night, it was seeing that, and then of course, like we do, like we're all selfish at some level, and so I put myself in the shoes of these videos, and I put myself in the shoes of, you know, the video of the dad, you know, kissing his 4-year-old bye, and I think about Daisy, who's right above my head as I sit in the living room, and she's in her room, and having put her to sleep, and there's no worry, and there's no conversation I'm having to have with her about, you know, if you hear something loud, and what, you know, just the stuff that I know is happening and seeing, and I know it's happening because I'm seeing it
Right.
from the people it's happening to, and so in a way, like it has been, I do think like it's been a good reality to see that from people, from individuals like us, that I'm not, you know, my source is not 4 or 5 major news networks, but it's real people sharing their story. But at the same time, like I can't be up till 3 a.m. every night and tossing and turning, not sleeping. You know, but then when I think about that, it's like, well, why? Like they are. And
Right.
so then I have that
Almost
grief
like
that comes back, and it's like
that guilt, right?
Yes, it's just this cycle
that I
of
have
guilt
to
is the
put
word,
myself
yes.
in, like almost this punishment because I got it so
Exactly.
good.
Yes.
I have to.
I don't deserve it.
I don't deserve this, right? Like my daughter's asleep with Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, you know, and and 2 blankets and all of her loveys and not in a bomb shelter.
Yeah.
You know, and we have to talk about that guilt because we're not the only ones experiencing that, you know, but when we overindulge, we're not of help to anybody. And I think it's important that we recognize what it feels like in our bodies and even in our minds when we may be overindulging, right? How that shows up, because for me, I start to, even now, I've had to restrain myself, because when I start overindulging, which my overindulgence might be a little bit less than your overindulgence,
Yeah.
right? I would not be up till 3 a.m. Like I don't have that capacity. But, you know, is that I tend to get that unhelpful anger that wants to just like kind of like yell at everyone or anyone who's, you know, divisive, or anyone who's saying anything that's the opposite of compassion, right? And I have to just recognize, like, hey, you know what? You need to put your phone down. Like, and what it feels like for me is my stomach starts to get really butterfly-y, and my voice, I feel it right here in my throat, and I just want to like yell, and I feel angry, but that comes from a place of passion, a passion for people, a passion for the world, right?
Yeah.
Passion for my own children and the world that they're going to grow up in, and this little guy that we're going to bring into the world, and just wanting to be like an advocate and recognizing like I can be an advocate in my little corner of the world, and for me that's enough.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that's so different, that phrase you just said, little corner of the world, because we've, I think, grown up, and I think maybe everyone, but millennials especially, with this idea that like you can change the world,
Sure.
and you know, technology and media and all these things that show us the world, and that was great and informative and educational, but with that it was like, if you weren't going to do something that changed the world, just don't do it, because you have the potential to, so go do big things. And I know for me, and like you said, for really us, that mindset shift away from the whole world to my little corner of the world, like what I can get my arms around, that helps, you know, and I don't want to be misinformed about things that are happening, but I know what I can actually have a positive effect on, and that is what is near, you know, and we'll talk in a little bit about, sure, you know, donating money and those things, of course, but like, but what I can really go do, because what you just said about, you know, you'll look for people, you know, who are being divisive or whatever, you'll be mad. Like that was me, is like, well, I'm angry. So whoever I see, the next person I see doing something bad or wrong or something I disagree with, I'll just take it out on them.
Well, I think a
And
lot
that's
of people
not
are
good.
like that, right? Like we've experienced people like that digitally, like online, but I also think a lot of people, man, are, and I think us too, we've all kind of said in our own ways, like feeling anxious, right? Like having this expectation, whether it was spoken or unspoken, that there was going to be conflict and then it was going to be resolved, right? And then seeing like, but okay, it wasn't. And I don't know, do you ever feel like uncertain? Like the uncertainty of this whole situation, does that lead you to feel more anxious?
Yeah, I think like I kind of struggle with the line of like I want to look at the news because I want to, like we said, be informed, and I want to keep up, and I'm anxious not knowing. I'm like, well, what is China going to do? And then what are we going to do? And how can this escalate? And all of these things.
Scenarios, yeah.
Or I'm anxious not looking at those things because I'm like, things are happening and I'm just sitting here. Again, like the guilt comes up of being like, am I just being ignorant and selfish by not looking at all that stuff? Because it makes me anxious, but now I'm anxious about
Not knowing.
not knowing and then feeling like, wow, like I can just sit here and not look at anything. But there are people that like are literally living in it.
Yeah.
They don't get the choice. And it's like, oh my gosh, I don't even know, you know, just the turmoil.
Yeah, and you don't want to be oblivious, but at the same time, and it's not true for everyone watching, but from what I know about us three, you know, part of the way we want to live is to be compassionate, you know, and to serve others and to not always be thinking of ourselves. And so with that calling that we feel, it does, I think, turn our heart to say, well, I need to know, like I need to know something. But, and this is something I think, we're becoming more aware of. And for me personally, like this is, I think, even a progress report from the pandemic of, okay, here's another global situation as well that is probably not affecting me as directly as, the pandemic did, but being able to check in and say, okay, like I want to feel and have that compassion for others and to serve others. But if I'm not well, then I'm not doing them any service. Like I'm not helping. I'm not like that. That's putting more of a burden because now I've almost substituted them in to a coping. This coping tool where I'm just going to serve. But then the moment they leave or the situation changes or something happens, I'm still unwell. And so I think, like if I was telling you, and I know a lot of people listening, probably in your shoes, a lot of people listening in my shoes, like all of us. But my thing is like it's okay to take care of yourself because that's what people need is the best version of you and the healthiest version of you, and not best as in performance or perfection, but the healthiest version. And so I think if you feel, and you would say, I would think, we're not all going to be 100% healthy all the time, but the healthier we are, the better we can actually be for other people. And if you're not there, then retreat, take time away.
You bring up compassion, it being a calling and something that we care about. And the opposite of that is compassion fatigue. Where we care, and as highly empathetic people, we feel what other people are feeling to a heavy level, and it can wear us out, right? We can burn ourselves out with that compassion and empathy, and so we have to be aware of that and how that when we are in that exhausted state, we're not showing up authentically. And I think that's what we mean as healthy, right? Is if I can be vulnerable and if I can lean into my support and I can keep my boundaries and say no and put my phone and do those sorts of things, then I maintain my emotional capacity versus burning it out, right? But kind of jumping back to that anxious state, it's important that we talk about and then our listeners know anxiety can be really helpful, right? Like anxiety at its core is a good thing. I'm sorry,
interrupting you. I've heard you share the smoke detector illustration.
Sure,
That is one of those helpful practical things.
What Chase is talking about is anxiety versus anxiety disorder.
Because when I hear you say anxiety, I think
anxiety disorder.
Yeah, I always go there.
And that's not the case. So anxiety functioning as it should, right, is designed to help us stay safe, stay out of danger. So like a smoke alarm in a house or any building that you're in, that smoke alarm's purpose is to alert us when there is real threat of danger, real threat of harm, right? Smoke or fire. Okay. And when that smoke alarm goes off, we are triggered to then problem solve, to take action. And we do that by putting the fire out, putting the smoke out, calling for help, whatever it may be. That smoke alarm goes off.
Taking the battery out, whatever.
Yeah, the smoke alarm goes off, okay? And then we go about our day. If that was our house and the smoke alarm was working in a hypersensitive way, where there was no actual threat of smoke or fire, we were instead just, letting the dog out or sitting down on our couch or flushing the toilet. None of those things are actual threats of smoke or fire, but the smoke alarm would go off anyways. In that scenario, that's a hypersensitive smoke alarm. That's what it's like living with an anxiety disorder, where we're scanning and perceiving threats that aren't actually there. Okay? And living in our bodies, restless, uneasy, right? What would it be like living in our house and our smoke alarm would just randomly go off? Like we would be really annoyed, really restless, and overwhelmed, okay? For no reason, no danger or threat reason. Does that make sense? So in situations like this where there is collective trauma or global tragedy happening, we're going to feel anxious. That does not mean we're going to have an anxiety disorder come from this, right? It means that our anxiety is going to flare up in saying, there's real threat of danger. There's real threat, okay? And I want to take action. When I'm seeing all of these things going on, it's on the news, my friends are talking about it, I want to take action. And in that, like, that's a really good thing. But that's where we have to pause and ask, like, where am I? Like, where am I emotionally and physically? Can I take action, and what kind of action, right? Because where we feel powerless, where we feel anxious, where we feel uncertain, where we feel angry, all of those things are there because something matters to us. And I think that we have to validate that at the core of this, something matters to us that we want to protect.
That's good.
Okay, and so there's different actions we can take, and it's important for us to recognize, like, whoa, what is the real danger to me? What is the real threat to me? And what are my perceived? What are my what ifs? You know, what if World War III happens? What if this? You know, what if that? And we have to challenge that with what if those scenarios versus what is. And what is what's actually happening right here, right now. For me, right? We know what's happening over there, but that's not my what is. My what is I'm safe in my home. I have access to take action in these ways, and let that be enough, and release what may come tomorrow, what may come the next week. Leave that to that time, right? And that's how we maintain a good perspective on our anxiety and boundaries on that anxiety, because it gets really creative and it gets really vivid in our mind in that what if land, you know? And we have to be responsible for recognizing when it's helpful anxiety and when it's really unhelpful.
Yeah, and I think about some of the things you're saying, and you know, here in just a second we're gonna talk about how, like, really the hows and some practical things we can do. But I had just had a couple thoughts there, like as you talk about anxiety, as you talked about earlier, you talked about this passion. Ultimately, and this is what you've taught me and what I've learned, is that these different emotions we have, they can be feelings, like people kind of, I think, belittle them to be, but they also can be a gift. Like out of you know, when we think about anger, like, I can be angry and that can just be, oh, I'm mad, or it can be a gift that's passion that reminds me, like, no, it's because I care. And we'll put I look at Montana because she's the technical one here. We'll put a book in the show notes that you have given me. I think Chip Dodd wrote it, and it's about the gift that these core emotions really can be.
Yeah, it's called The Voice of the Heart.
Yeah.
And stating that, you know, there's 8 core emotions and there's an impairment to every emotion, right, that we experience, and there's also a purpose to that emotion and to that feeling, you know. So feelings can be really good. Not every feeling is really helpful, right? You know, but it can direct us into where we need to go.
That's good.
Right?
And like, as you say that, I think about everyone listening, everyone who's watching today, like, your feelings aren't bad. And I think hopefully, you know what, even in this short conversation we've had, 2 things for me, like, it's a reminder that feelings can be good, and also that sharing those feelings and hearing me getting to share those things, but then getting to hear other people, like, it reminds me of our humanity. It reminds me of our need for relationship. It reminds me that I'm not the only one feeling these things. No. I'm not alone,
and we gotta
you
give
are not
ourselves
alone.
permission, and our listeners permission. Not that you need it, but sometimes we don't even recognize that, like, okay, it's okay for me to feel something, right? Like, even though it's around the world, like, I could be looking at a video and being like, why am I crying? Because, like, you're human, and God designed you to allow things to matter to you, for you to feel. And so to not just always go to, like, well, you know, it's not in my backyard, so it shouldn't matter to me. You know, or it's not my kid, so it shouldn't matter to me. But it's okay for it to matter to you. It's okay for you to feel something about that and be moved by that, and take action in your present world, even if that means you hold your kid a little bit longer. You know, even if that means you tip a little bit extra generously to your waiter or waitress. Like, whatever it looks like.
Well, we are going to finish this conversation next week. This ended up being a pretty long conversation that we feel like is going to be great, really, in two parts. This first part was a lot of the what and the why and kind of where we're all at. Next week, we're gonna finish that conversation for you, and it gets really practical about the how to take care of yourself, how to help the people around you, and how to help in global situations as well. And so I want to encourage you, share this first part of the conversation with someone and have them watch it with you next week as we finish our conversation about what's happening in our world and also what's happening in your world. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.